Changed very quickly in America. Breaking. Shelley Luther, a Dallas hair salon owner who opened in violation of the governor's executive order, sentenced to 7 days in jail for civil criminal contempt of court and fined $7,000.
Feeding my kids is not selfish. I have hairstylists that are going hungry.
Nothing screams financially helping citizens like fining them for trying to keep their business open so they could keep food on their table and get money. In this case, the judge gave her a chance to apologize.
That you now see the error of your ways and understand that the society cannot function where one's own belief in a concept of liberty permits you to flaunt your disdain for the rulings of duly elected officials. That you owe an apology to the elected officials whom you disrespected by flagrantly ignoring and in one case defiling their orders, which you now know obviously apply to you. That you understand that the proper way in which in an ordered society to engage concerns which you may have had is to hire a lawyer and advocate for change, an exception or an amendment to laws that you find offensive. That you publicly state that this is the way that citizens in the state should behave. And that you represent to this court that you will today cease operation of your salon and not reopen until after further orders of the government permit you to do so. This court will consider the payment of a fine in lieu of the incarceration which you've demonstrated that you have so clearly earned. Is there anything that you would like to say?
But Shelley Luther did not want to apologize.
Judge, I would like to say that I have much respect for this court and laws, and that I've never been in this position before, and it's not some place that I want to be. But I have to disagree with you, sir, when you say that I'm selfish, because feeding my kids is not selfish. I have hairstylists that are going hungry because they'd rather feed their kids. So, sir, if you think the law is more important than kids getting fed, then please go ahead with your decision, but I am not going to shut the salon.
I think what she's saying is completely understandable. I mean, there's tens of millions of people losing their job, losing their business, losing their salaries, not having access to health facilities like gyms and spas that keep people healthier. I mean, this has been an absolute nightmarish situation, whichever way you want to spin it, but I guess this is America now. In Michigan, another citizen wanted to give their perspective on the shutdown.
I just asking for my dignity back. I want to work. Just allow me to work as a man of color. I don't want any handout. Taking handout to me and just giving me free stuff, it takes away my dignity. At the end of the day, I want to feel good about myself, that I work and pay my own bill. Why should I depend on other people to take care of me? Okay. You know, and I feel strongly about that, and I believe those values came from my belief that I am created in the image of God.
What an answer. What a beautiful answer. I have one final question today, and it's, how are you enjoying your free trial of socialism?
It never works. I am originally from Trinidad and Tobago, and I live very close to Venezuela, just 7 miles. And I saw what socialism did to that country. Our small island of Trinidad and Tobago is flooded by Venezuelans because of socialism. You know, it never works. Man is created to work and take care of themselves, not to depend on anyone to pay their bills. And this is what I believe, and I'm going to die for that. I am going to die for that.
Once again, making total sense. There's tens of millions of Americans who feel this way. There's tens of millions of Americans who are losing everything that they've worked very hard to build over the last 30, 40, 50 years due to forced government shutdowns and forced government mandates, off of the speculation that they would lower hospitalizations, which they were completely off on, and they actually bankrupted the hospital industry in many senses, and tens of thousands of nurses are being laid off because they canceled elective surgeries, which can also have an impact on your health, of course. They're not talking about what happens when you cut off the poor and the middle class from being able to go to work, go to gym, get out of their house, which may not be a healthy environment, and live a normal schedule. We know in Italy they live longer than most places in the world because they have social cohesion and a community. They get outdoors and sunlight. Cut all that off, what do you think happens? Well, don't ask that question because that part of health is not allowed. Remember this clip I just showed you? Governor Whitmer and Jake Tapper seem to hint these are racist neo-Nazis that just can't hold back their racism during the pandemic.
These protests came after President Trump tweeted, liberate Michigan. He tweeted, quote, the governor of Michigan should give a little, put out the fire. He said that these are very good people about the protesters that were featured in the video, to which the executive director of the Jewish Democratic Council of America, Haley Sofer, who is from Lansing, Michigan, she compared those comments to President Trump referring to those marching alongside neo-Nazis in Charlottesville as very fine people. Is that how you see these protesters, in that vein, in that extreme?
Well, some of the outrageousness of what happened at our Capitol this week, depicted some of the worst racism and awful parts of our history in this country. The Confederate flags and nooses, the swastikas, the, behavior that you've seen in all of the clips is not representative of who we are in Michigan. And the fact of the matter is, we're in a global pandemic. This isn't something we just negotiate ourselves out of, and it's a political matter. This is a public health crisis.
Because this is what politicians and media want people to think. If you believe in freedom, if you want to keep your business afloat or not get evicted or be able to pay rent and not have to rely on a government check for your living, well then you must be a neo-Nazi racist, because there's just no other explanation for why people would want freedom and liberty in a country that was founded on freedom and liberty. It's preposterous, right? Facebook, Google, even the airlines, they'll work with the World Health Organization, who was wrong in January about human-to-human transmission. They were wrong in February with travel bans. They were wrong in March with mask recommendations. But heck, listen to the experts. Just don't listen to the experts when they gave you advice before.
Now, in the United States, people should not be walking around with masks.
You're sure of it? Because people are listening really closely to this.
Right now, people should not be walking. There's no reason to be walking around with a mask. When you're in the middle of an outbreak, wearing a mask might make people feel a little bit better, and it might even block a droplet, but it's not providing the perfect protection that people think that it is. And often there are unintended consequences. People keep fiddling with the mask and they keep touching their face.
And can you get some schmutz sort of staying inside there?
Of course. But when you think masks, you should think of healthcare providers needing them and people who are ill.
And there's obvious science behind breathing in recycled air, and there's also a reason a lot of nurses, doctors, and health experts like Dr. Fauci told you not to wear a mask before, but just ignore what they just told you, because now what they just told you is the undebatable word of God. If you want your First Amendment, if you want your job, if you want your salary, if you want your house, if you want your freedom, if you want your liberty, if you want the ability to go to a health facility to keep yourself from getting overweight, well, hey, just stop right there, mister. You must be some sort of Nazi fascist or whatever they're trying to say. It's disgusting, it's disturbing, and as people are getting murdered in the Chicago streets like the politicians and media never care about because there's no race or divisive angle that they could figure out that they can blame on somebody else, they would actually have to take accountability for things they don't want to talk about. As that's happening still in record numbers, here's the Chicago politicians.
Now, I've directed Superintendent Brown to order all police districts to give special attention to these parties. And this is how it's going to be. We will shut you down, we will cite you, and if we need to, we will arrest you and we will take you to jail. Period. There should be nothing unambiguous about that. Don't make us treat you like a criminal. But if you act like a criminal and you violate the law and you refuse to do what is necessary to save lives in the city in the middle of a pandemic, we will take you to jail. Period.
We'll arrest any innocent civilian for resisting our tyranny. It's getting wildly out of control. You now have what is pretty much a government-forced Great Depression, which when it's all said and done might be the worst financial, economic, and health dilemma of the last 150 years. And they're not saying on television that everybody who dies with COVID-19 died from COVID-19 in the death count, even if they're 100% sure that they didn't actually die from COVID-19.
Technically, even if you died of a clear alternate cause, but you had COVID at the same time, it's still listed as a COVID death. So everyone who's listed as a COVID death doesn't mean that that was the cause of the death, but they had COVID at the time of death. I hope that's helpful.
The intent is right now that if someone dies with COVID-19, we are counting that as a COVID-19 death.
Can you be sure? I mean, you hear from coroners that that's not necessarily the case.
Now, people that still have common sense would figure out, well, if they did that to the common cold or any other virus, you'd have astronomical numbers in the hundreds of thousands. But don't think, just keep watching the television and people wearing a mask, we're in it together, your favorite celebrities. Don't ask the critical questions. Don't question if the Bill of Rights is important. Heck, the Bill of Rights is even above some governors' pay grade.
By what authority did you nullify the Bill of Rights in issuing this order? How do you have the power to do that?
That's above my pay grade, Tucker. So I wasn't thinking of the Bill of Rights when we did this. We went to first of all, we looked at the data and the science, and it says...
But if you're a Trump supporter, don't worry, because as long as those governors compliment President Trump, then he seems to be more okay with it than he is with Georgia or Sweden, which he keeps railing against because they have too much freedom now, according to the Republican Party. Isn't that funny how they could just move the goalpost so many times? It's for hospitalizations. We think this many people are going to die. We think the mortality rate is this. And as all of their predictions just completely collapse, they don't even have to give a reason for why they're doing it anymore. I mean, they could just get on Fox News and say that 2 to 3 million people would have died, and I guess people will believe it because they like the guy.
We would have lost a lot more people, Brett, if we would have done, as an example, you call it herd. If we would have done herd. In other words, everything's wonderful, let's just keep going along. Herd immunity. We would have lost 2.5 million people, I think, or 1.5 million or 2 million people. No, I think I think the American people have done a good job. This is a tragic situation.
So this is the new America now. Ignore the fact that 3 million people die every year from things like diarrhea and alcohol. Ignore the science behind sunlight and staying indoors and not having a schedule and eating too much and exercising not enough and not having social interaction and not having a schedule to get you out of your house. Just ignore all that science and health because, I mean, they didn't tell you to think about that. What happens if you function throughout society like a normal human being and actually exercise and go to events, or you just sit inside and aren't really allowed to do anything for a year? Which version of you do you think would be healthier? Wait, don't ask that question. They didn't tell you to. All they could do is just take credit for anything good that happens, and I guess we're all just supposed to believe it and not question it whatsoever. And to the people who say you don't have a medical degree, don't worry, the ones who do. Like the Nobel Prize winner who discovered HIV, he has some thoughts on it, but just not the right thoughts, so they won't listen to him. There's other Nobel Prize winning scientists who say to open up. There's somebody on the front lines of Bronx who got COVID-19 and his kids got COVID-19. He thinks we should open up. These doctors, oh wait, no, they got kicked off YouTube. Never mind. So this is absolutely, at bare minimum, a debatable situation when you have the government closing and forcing tens upon tens of millions of people to lose everything they've worked for, lose their salary, in many cases lose the ability to feed their kids, at best get a socialist/communist check to feed their family for a temporary amount of time, in which the guy who's responsible for providing it thinks it's enough for 10 weeks.
Deposit, it's really bridge liquidity for people as they go through these difficult times.
Bridge liquidity for about 8 weeks?
Well, I think the entire package provides economic relief overall for about 10 weeks.
$1,200 is enough for 10 weeks when you forcefully close people's jobs and business. I don't know on what planet that's true, but I mean, at least he's a Trump guy, so Trump supporters will be fine with it. And, I guess people who are left-wing just want to quarantine until 2030. They don't ever want to open up. They're mad. Oh, it's the alt-right wants to open up in California. I mean, it's pathetic and crazy. And the easy science and solution behind if you're really afraid of the virus is you can quarantine until 2024, 2026, 2021. Whatever you want. Nobody's forcing you to leave, but if you think that your fear, and in many cases false interpretations from false data that were never true to begin with, and it was provably untrue in March, if you think that gives you the justification to destroy tens of millions of people's lives and their businesses and their jobs and their salary, and in many cases their health and their ability to see a doctor to talk about very important things like cancer and other things, if you think your fear has the ability to railroad an entire country, including the meat market, which no matter how many times Trump says, oh no, don't worry, I fixed the meat market. No, you didn't. There is a problem. And on a worldwide scale, there's an even bigger problem. So obviously, shutting down entire industries is going to bankrupt people. It's already happening across the country to big businesses, to small businesses. But don't worry, he's got